Doral Station had not been designed for mercy. It had been designed for throughput, for the efficient movement of cargo, personnel, and data between the Veth corridor and the outer transit lanes, and it performed this function with the cold competence of infrastructure that has never been asked to feel anything. The ceilings were high because pressurized volume was cheaper to maintain than additional decks, not because anyone had considered the psychological effect of height on people who had been standing in lines for 6 hours. The lighting was calibrated for productivity. The floors were a composite alloy that had been chosen because it did not stain. Nobody, at any point in Doral Station's 30-year operational history, had apparently anticipated a day when it would need to be something other than efficient. Benjamin had figured this out approximately 90 minutes into his shift. He was not, technically, supposed to have a shift. He had arrived on Doral 3 days ago on a logistics consultancy contract, something about optimizing the cargo routing algorithms in Sector 7, a job that was supposed to take a week and involve very little human contact. The displacement event that had redirected 4 refugee transports to Doral simultaneously had not been part of the contract. Neither had the aid distribution effort that had assembled itself in Concourse C with the chaotic energy of something that urgently needed to exist and had not had time to be organized properly. Benjamin had walked past it on his way to the Sector 7 briefing, stopped, assessed the situation with the particular reflex of someone who had spent 15 years making sure things went where they were supposed to go, and had somehow been handing out nutrition packs for the past 6 hours. He had given his own allocation away in the second hour. This had not felt like a decision so much as arithmetic. The line moved in increments, punctuated by the periodic announcements of a station AI that had clearly been programmed before today's events and was doing its best to remain relevant. Every 11 minutes, it reminded everyone in Concourse C that the stellar cartography exhibit on Deck 4 was open until the 20th hour, and encouraged visitors to experience the wonders of mapped space. The first few times people had looked up. By hour 4, nobody reacted at all, which was, Benjamin thought, either a sign of impressive adaptability or of exhaustion so complete that the brain had begun editing out non-essential input. Possibly both. The drone situation was not helping. There were 4 distribution drones operating in Concourse C, squat units with rounded corners that had been designed for general supply tasks, and repurposed for today with the addition of a cheerful yellow stripe that someone had apparently believed would make them seem more approachable. 3 of them were functioning within acceptable parameters. The 4th, Unit C7, according to the registration on its chassis, had developed what Benjamin could only describe as a philosophical commitment to thermal blankets. It had been loaded with a mixed supply manifest, and had, at some point in the morning, arrived at the private conclusion that thermal blankets were the correct response to every presented need. A woman had asked for protein rations. C7 had offered her a thermal blanket with the calm confidence of a machine that knows what you actually need. A man with 2 children had requested water filtration tablets. C7 had considered this and offered him a thermal blanket. Benjamin had flagged it for maintenance twice. Maintenance had confirmed receipt of both flags. C7 continued its work with serene, blanket-focused purpose. By hour 5, a small cluster of people near Station Column 14 had more thermal blankets than they knew what to do with and had begun, with the improvisational creativity of people in difficult situations, to trade them for other things. A secondary economy had emerged. Benjamin had watched a man exchange 2 thermal blankets for a meal supplement and a phone charging cable, and had thought that this was either deeply depressing or quietly remarkable, and had settled on both. He was reorganizing the remaining nutrition pack crates, a task nobody had assigned him, but which clearly needed doing, when he became aware of a presence near his left elbow. He looked down. She was small, even accounting for her age, with crimson skin that had gone a little pale in the specific way that happens to people who have been waiting too long in difficult places. Her ears were long and gently pointed, framing a face of absolute composure. She was not looking at him with the direct appeal of a child asking for something. She was simply standing near him in the manner of someone who has learned, through careful empirical observation, that proximity is more reliable than requests. She was also very clearly hungry. Benjamin reached into the crate beside him, located a nutrition pack, and handed it to her without comment or ceremony, the way you hand a tool to someone who is in the middle of using it. She accepted it the same way, sat down on the floor directly beside his crate, cross-legged, and began eating with the total focused concentration of genuine hunger, which is different from every other kind. He went back to reorganizing. Nearby, Unit C7 approached an elderly man with a thermal blanket. The man already had 3. He took the 4th anyway. It was, at this point, simply easier. She finished the nutrition pack with the methodical thoroughness of someone who has learned not to leave anything behind, folded the empty wrapper with a neatness that seemed habitual rather than taught, and set it beside her on the floor. Then she looked up at Benjamin with eyes that were the color of deep amber and contained, he noticed, a quality of assessment that he associated with people considerably older than whatever age she was. He had gone back to the crates. She watched him work for a moment with the patient, evaluative silence of someone conducting a study. "You gave me yours," she said. It was not a question. It was the delivery of a conclusion. Benjamin glanced down at her. "There's enough," he said, which was not entirely true but was true enough for the purposes of the conversation. She appeared to file this response under a category he didn't have access to, then stood up, brushing the composite floor from her clothing with a practicality that suggested she had sat on worse floors than this and expected to sit on more. She came roughly to his elbow. She looked at the crates, at the line, at the general organized difficulty of Concourse C with the expression of someone assessing a logistics problem. And Benjamin had the brief, strange feeling that she was doing the same arithmetic he had done 6 hours ago. "It's not going to reach," she said. "No," Benjamin agreed. "Not today." She nodded once, with the gravity of a professional confirming a shared assessment, and then remained where she was, which meant she was apparently staying. Benjamin had managed supply routes through 3 contested transit corridors, and had once spent 11 hours in a cargo hold on Doral Station, negotiating the return of a misrouted medical shipment from a Volkai freight captain, who communicated exclusively through intermediaries and strategic silences. He felt reasonably confident in his ability to navigate complicated situations. He was somewhat less certain about what to do with a small child who had apparently decided he was now part of her itinerary. Nearby, a soft chime indicated that Unit C7 had located another recipient. A young woman with a sleeping infant received a thermal blanket with the quiet inevitability of the tide. She looked at it. She looked at C7. C7's status light blinked in a way that could generously be interpreted as encouraging. The woman added the blanket to the one already over her shoulders and said nothing, because what was there really to say? "What's your name?" the girl asked. "Benjamin." She considered this with mild interest, as though entering it into a mental record. "I'm Saya," she said, and then, after a brief pause of the kind that precedes information being shared in the order the speaker considers logical, "I'm 7. In standard years. In Athari reckoning I'm closer to 9, but the Athari calendar has an intercalary adjustment every 32 months that most people don't account for correctly, so it depends on which system you consider more valid." Benjamin stopped reorganizing the crates. "Do you have a position on that?" She appeared to appreciate that he had asked. "The Athari system is astronomically more precise," she said, "but standard years are more practical for communication purposes, so I use both depending on context." "That's a reasonable approach." "I think so," she said, without any particular pride, simply as a matter of recorded agreement. The line moved. The station AI reminded everyone that the stellar cartography exhibit on Deck 4 offered a complimentary star naming certificate with every visit, a detail that landed in Concourse C with the soft irrelevance of a feather falling into a crisis. Two people glanced at the ceiling speaker with expressions that suggested they had thoughts about the station AI and had decided not to share them publicly. Saya watched the line with that same assessing quality, and then she looked back at Benjamin, and the expression on her face shifted in a way that was subtle but distinct, a slight recalibration. The look of someone who has been withholding a piece of information and has now decided that the moment for it has arrived. "You should probably know something," she said. In Benjamin's experience, sentences that began this way were rarely followed by simple information. They were followed by information that reorganized other information. He set down the nutrition pack he was holding. "All right," he said. She delivered it with the calm matter-of-factness of someone sharing a relevant detail, the kind of thing you mention not to impress, but because it seems contextually useful. "My mother is the queen." The line moved. C7 navigated serenely between two groups of people, thermal blanket ready. Somewhere in the middle distance, a child laughed at something and was briefly the loudest sound in Concourse C. Benjamin looked at Saya. He looked at the aid distribution point, and the line, and the general organized weight of everything around them, and the empty nutrition pack wrapper she had folded and set neatly on the floor. He looked back at her. She was watching him with the patient expression of someone who has delivered accurate information and is now waiting for the recipient to finish processing it. "Does your mother," Benjamin said carefully, "know where you are?" Saya considered this with genuine thoughtfulness, tilting her head slightly in a way that suggested she was giving the question more credit than her answer was ultimately going to reflect. "That's probably a secondary concern," she said. Benjamin had, in his professional life, encountered a number of situations that required him to rapidly reassess his understanding of what was happening. There had been the Verath cargo incident. There had been the time a routine supply audit on Doral Station had revealed that an entire deck's worth of climate control equipment had been rerouted to a location that did not officially exist. There had been the 11 hours with the Voakai freight captain. In each of these cases, he had found that the most useful thing to do was to stop, allow the new information to settle into its proper position relative to everything else, and then proceed from the adjusted understanding rather than from the one he had arrived with. He applied this method now. "When you say queen," he said, "you mean in a formal governmental sense." "Yes," said Saya, "the Athari Concordat. She holds the executive and ceremonial authority. It's a dual-function role which she finds inefficient, but it's traditional." She paused. "She's tried to restructure it twice. The council prefers the current arrangement." "I see," said Benjamin, in the tone of a man who was continuing to process. Saya seemed willing to allow him this. She had the patience, he was beginning to notice, of someone who had explained things to adults before and had learned to give them adequate time. She picked up her folded wrapper from the floor, examined it briefly, and located a recycling receptacle 6 meters away with the accuracy of someone who had already mapped the immediate area. She walked to it, deposited the wrapper, and returned. The entire operation took 11 seconds. Benjamin used them. "And you're here," he said when she came back, "on Doral Station, during a displacement crisis." "We were already in transit when the alert came through," she said. "Our ship docked 4 hours ago. My mother is in the emergency coordination meetings on Deck 9. A brief pause. They've been in session since we arrived." "And you decided to come to Concourse C." "I was with an attendant," Saya said, in the tone of someone providing context rather than making an excuse. "She needed to find the medical station. I told her I would wait by column 12. Column 12 is that way." She pointed in a direction that was, Benjamin noted, not the direction of column 12. "I found the distribution line. I followed it to see where it ended." And where it ended was here. Where it ended was you, she corrected, with the precision of someone who prefers accuracy in summaries. Benjamin absorbed this. Nearby, the station AI announced that Doral Station's premium transit lounge on Deck 2 offered complimentary beverage service to holders of Class A boarding passes. A piece of information that arrived in Concourse C like a small, oblivious spaceship landing in the wrong coordinates. A man near column 11 turned to look at the speaker with an expression that contained multitudes. He turned back without comment. There was a collective, silent agreement in Concourse C that the station AI was operating in a different reality, and that engaging with it was not a productive use of anyone's energy. "Does anyone know where you are?" Benjamin asked. Saya considered this with what appeared to be honest reflection. "My attendant knows I was near column 12, she said, "and I've been gone approximately 40 minutes, so she has likely expanded her search parameters by now." "Expanded her search parameters," Benjamin repeated. "She's methodical," Saya said, with what sounded like genuine admiration. Benjamin looked at the girl, at the long pointed ears, the crimson skin that had recovered some of its depth now that she'd eaten, the amber eyes that were currently watching him with the focused interest of someone who found the situation genuinely worth observing. She was 7 or 9, depending on your calendar allegiances, and she was on her own in a crowded transit station in the middle of a crisis. And her mother was in emergency coordination meetings on Deck 9, and she had told him this the way you tell someone what time it is. "We should let someone know where you are," he said. "Probably," she agreed pleasantly. "Do you have a communicator?" She reached into a small pocket and produced a device that was, even to Benjamin's moderately informed eye, not a standard civilian communicator. It was slimmer, darker, and had the particular quality of equipment that has been designed to do its job extremely well and to look unremarkable while doing it. She looked at it for a moment. "It requires authorization for outgoing calls when I'm in an unsecured location," she said. "My mother's security team configured it. They're very thorough." "Can you receive calls?" "Yes, but nobody has called yet, which means they haven't confirmed I'm missing. They've confirmed I'm not where I'm supposed to be, which is different." She appeared to consider this a meaningful technical distinction. C7 drifted past them at a gentle operational speed, assessed the surrounding population, and presented Benjamin with a thermal blanket. Benjamin took it. He was not sure why he took it. C7's status light blinked in a manner that could only be described as satisfied, and it moved on. Saya watched this exchange with interest. "Does that unit do that to everyone?" "It has a strong point of view about thermal blankets," Benjamin said. She nodded slowly, with the expression of someone storing this information next to other information about how the world works. Then she looked up at him with that amber assessment and said, with complete calm, "You're not going to leave me here alone, are you?" It was not, he noticed, a question either. Benjamin had just enough time to confirm that no, he was not going to leave her alone, before the situation resolved itself with the sudden efficiency of things that have been building pressure for a while. She came from the direction of column 9, which was not column 12, which suggested that the search parameters had indeed been expanded. She was moving with the particular speed of someone who is not running, because running would communicate a loss of control that is professionally unacceptable, but who is covering ground at a rate that makes the distinction largely academic. The people in the distribution line registered her approach the way crowds register certainty. A small, unconscious parting that happens before anyone has consciously decided to move. Benjamin saw her and understood several things in a short period of time. She was tall, with the same crimson skin and long pointed ears as Saya, though her ears held a stillness that suggested they were being deliberately controlled. Her bearing was the kind that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. She was wearing clothes that were practical and unadorned in the way that expensive things sometimes are, and she had the face of someone who had been in emergency coordination meetings for 4 hours, and had just been handed an additional emergency that was of a more personal nature. The relief on that face, when she located Saya, was real and immediate, and lasted approximately 3 seconds before it was rearranged into something more composed. The 3 seconds, Benjamin thought, were the most honest thing he had seen all day. Saya looked up at her mother's arrival with the expression of someone who had always known this moment was coming, and had simply been making productive use of the available time. "You were not at column 12, her mother said. Her voice was even. It was the evenness of significant effort. "I was at column 12 initially," Saya said. "Then I followed the distribution line to its end." It's useful to understand systems completely. A pause. "I was hungry." The woman looked at her daughter for a long moment with the specific expression of a parent who has a great deal to say, and has made a calculated decision about how much of it to say right now, in public, in the middle of a crisis aid distribution in Concourse C. The calculation appeared to produce a number that was smaller than the total available amount. She looked at Benjamin. He became aware that he was still holding the thermal blanket C7 had given him, for reasons he still couldn't fully explain. He set it on the crate beside him with what he hoped was an unobtrusive movement. "She came to the end of the line," he said. "I gave her something to eat. She's been here since." The woman studied him with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who is very good at reading people and is currently reading him. It lasted long enough to be noticeable, and not long enough to be uncomfortable. Then something in her expression settled. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it with a precision and weight that made it different from the reflexive version of the same words. It was the thanks of someone who understood exactly what had and hadn't happened, and was responding to the accurate version of events. "It wasn't complicated," Benjamin said. "It was sufficient," she said, which he understood somehow was the more meaningful response. Saya, who had been observing this exchange with the focused attention she applied to everything, chose this moment to contribute. "He gave me his allocation," she said, with the air of someone ensuring the record is complete. "He'd already given his away before I arrived. He reorganized the crates without being asked. And he took a thermal blanket from the malfunctioning drone even though he didn't need it, which I think was an act of social management rather than practical need." Benjamin looked at her. She looked back at him with serene accuracy. Her mother looked at him with an expression that had shifted into something that was, unmistakably, the early stages of amusement, held at a professional distance but present nonetheless. "I'm Era," she said. "Benjamin." "I know," she said, and then, at his expression, "the station volunteer registry. My security team pulled it when Saya's attendant reported her location uncertainty. You were flagged as the last confirmed contact." "Location uncertainty," Saya repeated, with the tone of someone who appreciated the phrasing. "That is what it is called," Era said, in the direction of her daughter, with a delivery so precise it functioned simultaneously as a correction and as the closing of a subject. Somewhere behind them, C7 had found a new recipient. A teenage boy received a thermal blanket with the expression of someone who had stopped asking questions about the universe and had decided simply to accept what it offered. He put it over his shoulders. It was, objectively, quite a good thermal blanket. Era looked at the distribution setup, at the line, at the organized difficulty of Concourse C, with an assessment that was different from Saya's but came, Benjamin thought, from the same place. The same reflex toward understanding how a system was functioning and where it was failing. She looked at it for long enough that it became clear she was not just looking. "How long has the line been at this length?" she asked. "Since hour 2, Benjamin said. Supply met maybe 60% of projected need today. The drone situation hasn't helped," he considered. "One of them has strong feelings about thermal blankets." Era absorbed this without apparent surprise, in the manner of someone who has already absorbed a great deal today and has developed considerable capacity. "The coordination meeting on Deck 9 has been discussing resupply routing for 4 hours, she said. "They have not reached a conclusion." "I know," said Benjamin. "I can see the line." She looked at him again with that same direct attention, and this time the amusement was slightly less distant. Era did not leave. This surprised her, Benjamin suspected, at least as much as it surprised him. She had the look of someone who had arrived with a clear objective: retrieve Saya, confirm safety, return to Deck 9, and had found that the situation had developed a mild gravitational pull that was interfering with the straightforward execution of that plan. She stood beside the crates for a moment with the posture of someone about to say a polite goodbye, and then she looked at the line again, and the goodbye didn't happen. Saya, who had relocated herself to a seated position on a low supply crate nearby, watched this development with the quiet interest of a researcher observing a predicted outcome. "The resupply routing problem," Benjamin said, because the subject was there and they were both standing next to it. "What's the actual block? Is it allocation, authorization, or physical routing?" Era glanced at him with the slight recalibration of someone who had expected a different kind of conversation. "Both," she said. "The Concordat has authorized additional supply, but the nearest distribution hub is Marin Station, and the direct corridor is currently flagged for debris interference from the displacement event. The alternative route adds 11 hours. 11 hours through the Veth secondary lane. You know the corridor. I routed cargo through it for 2 years, Benjamin said. The debris flag is probably a precautionary hold. The actual navigable window through the Eastern Passage is clear more than 80% of the time. It needs a manual review request, not a reroute." Era was quiet for a moment. It was the particular quality of quiet that follows information landing somewhere useful. "The committee has been treating it as a fixed obstruction," she said. "Committees often do," Benjamin said, and then felt this was perhaps too direct a thing to say to someone whose title he had been informed of 20 minutes ago. But Era's expression suggested she found it accurate rather than offensive, which was either a good sign or an indicator that she had been in the meeting long enough to agree with most criticisms of it. "There's a man on the committee," she said, "who has spent 40 minutes explaining why the Eastern Passage review process requires a minimum 3-day processing window." "It doesn't," Benjamin said. "Emergency Logistics Protocol 7 allows same-session review under crisis classification. Doral Station has been under crisis classification since this morning." Era looked at him with an expression he was starting to recognize, the focused, assessing attention that Saya also deployed, arriving from the same direction but covering more ground. "You're a logistics consultant," she said. "Cargo routing mostly. I was supposed to be fixing an algorithm in Sector 7. Were you?" "I got distracted," Benjamin said, with a slight gesture toward Concourse C, the line, the crates, and the general situation, which Era appeared to receive as a complete explanation. Nearby, C7 completed a slow navigational arc around a family of 4 and presented the eldest child, a boy of perhaps 10, with a thermal blanket. The boy looked at it. He already had one. He looked at C7. C7's operational light blinked with the calm certainty of a machine that has never once doubted itself. The boy took the blanket. He folded it and put it under his arm with the resigned efficiency of someone building an inventory they hadn't planned for. Saya had been listening to the conversation from her crate with the expression she wore when she was following something closely and choosing not to interrupt, which was, Benjamin had gathered, a conscious choice rather than a default state. She now looked at her mother and said, "He also knew about the Athari calendar intercalary system." Era looked at her daughter. "Did he?" "He didn't know about it," Saya clarified with precision. "But when I explained it, he engaged with it correctly." "What does that mean?" "It means he asked a relevant question instead of saying that's interesting, and then continuing with what he was already saying." She paused. Most adults do the second thing. Era absorbed this, and then looked at Benjamin with an expression that had moved past amusement into something warmer and more unguarded. The kind of look that surfaces when a person is tired enough that the effort of maintaining a particular presentation has become more expensive than it's worth. It lasted only a moment, but it was the most unguarded thing he'd seen from her, and it felt oddly like being trusted with something. "She does this," Era said. "She evaluates people and then submits her findings." "I've noticed," Benjamin said. "She's accurate." "Unfailingly," Era said, with the weight of long experience. The station's lighting shifted almost imperceptibly, the beginning of the gradual transition toward evening cycles, a change of perhaps 3% in luminosity that the station systems implemented so slowly it was designed to be subconscious. Benjamin had been on enough stations to recognize it. The day was moving toward its edge. The line had shortened, not because supply had increased, but because a point had been reached where the remaining people had made their calculations, as everyone eventually did, and the distribution was settling into its final hour with the quiet of things winding down. Era was looking at the line with the expression she wore when she was thinking about something larger than the immediate view. Benjamin had only known her for a short time, but the expression was already recognizable. A particular stillness that indicated the visible thing was being used to think about an invisible one. 4 hours in a meeting, she said to no one specifically, and the line is still there. The line was always going to be there today, Benjamin said. Today was always going to be insufficient. The question was how insufficient and whether tomorrow is better. He paused. That's the only question that's ever actually available. Era turned to look at him and didn't say anything for a moment. And Saya on her crate watched them both with the expression of someone who has observed something go in the direction she expected, and is finding this quietly satisfying. The distribution line closed at the 19th hour. It didn't end so much as exhaust itself. The last few people receiving what was available, the volunteers beginning the quiet work of consolidating empty crates, and logging the day's numbers into systems that would produce reports that would be read by people in rooms who had not been in Concourse C. Benjamin helped stack the final crates with the same unhurried practicality he had applied to everything else, and the concourse settled into the particular stillness of a space that has been full of people and effort, and is now in the process of remembering what it was before. Era had made 2 calls during the final hour. The first had been brief and professional. She had stepped a few meters away, spoken with someone on Deck 9 for 4 minutes, and returned with the expression of someone who has introduced a piece of information into a meeting and is waiting to see what the meeting does with it. The second call, 30 minutes later, had been shorter and considerably more satisfying, judging by the quality of the silence that followed it. She hadn't explained either call. Benjamin hadn't asked. But the Eastern Passage, he suspected, was going to receive its manual review request before the night cycle was done. Saya had spent the final hour in a conversation with the boy who had accumulated the thermal blankets. They were sitting together on adjacent crates engaged in what appeared to be a detailed exchange of information about something Benjamin couldn't quite hear, and the boy was nodding with the focused expression of someone receiving a thorough briefing on a topic he hadn't known he was interested in until 3 minutes ago. This was, Benjamin had come to understand, a characteristic Saya experience. "She's explaining the station's atmospheric cycling system," Era said, following his gaze. "She read the technical manual on the ship. She reads technical manuals. For enjoyment." "For enjoyment," Era confirmed, with the tone of a person who has made peace with something wonderful and slightly exhausting. Benjamin finished securing the last crate and stood up straight and looked at Concourse C, at the emptying space, the composite floor that did not stain, the high ceilings designed for throughput and not for mercy. It looked the same as it had this morning. Stations always did. The events that happened inside them left no physical record, which was either a failure of architecture or simply the nature of places built for passing through. He had arrived on Doral 3 days ago to fix an algorithm. He was not sure that was still the most accurate description of why he was here. C7 drifted through the emptying concourse with the serene, purposeful energy of a machine that has had a productive day and knows it. It navigated past a volunteer collecting charge cables, assessed the remaining population of Concourse C, and located Benjamin with the quiet accuracy of a unit that had clearly cataloged him hours ago. It extended its delivery arm. Benjamin looked at it. On it sat a thermal blanket offered with the full, unwavering conviction of a machine that has never once reconsidered its position. He took it. At this point it felt like the natural conclusion of something. Era watched this and said nothing for a moment. Then, "I've submitted a maintenance report on that unit twice today." "I've submitted too," Benjamin said. "I think it may be beyond reports." "Some things are," she said. The small escort that Benjamin had half noticed materializing near column 11 sometime in the last hour had become slightly more visible now that the concourse had thinned. 3 individuals in the unremarkable clothing of people who are professionally unremarkable, positioned with the casual precision of long practice. Saya had acknowledged them when they appeared with a brief nod that was so practiced it was clearly inherited. They had nodded back. It had the quality of a ritual that everyone involved found mildly tedious and mutually respected. Era turned to face him, and the directness was back, the full, unhurried attention that didn't perform itself. "The resupply corridor review will go through tonight," she said. "The first transports should reach Doral by the 14th hour tomorrow." "That's good," Benjamin said. "The logistics framework for the secondary distribution, the routing from Doral to the outlying points, is poorly structured. The committee is not well equipped to address it." She paused, in the way she paused when the next sentence had been considered before being released. "I'd like to ask you to consult on it, formally, through the Concordat emergency framework. It would require you to stay on Doral past your current contract." Benjamin looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who has made a precise offer and is waiting for a precise response. And underneath the precision was something less formal. The look of a person who has spent a long day being responsible for many things and has found, in the middle of it, one conversation that felt like ground rather than water, and is acknowledging that this is not nothing. "The algorithm in Sector 7, he said, "can presumably wait," she said, "or be reassigned." "It's a routing algorithm," Benjamin said. "Then it should understand," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Saya had concluded her briefing of the thermal blanket boy, who now had the expression of someone whose understanding of atmospheric cycling had been permanently expanded. She slid off her crate and crossed to her mother's side, and stood there with the composure of someone who had always known how today was going to end, and had simply allowed it to arrive. "Yes," Benjamin said. Era nodded once, with a quality that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one, the expression of someone who has been measuring something carefully all day, and has just found that the measurement is what she thought it was. Saya looked up at him. "You'll want to read the Concordat emergency framework document," she said. "I can send it to you. It's quite long, but the relevant sections are 7 through 12. Section 9 has an error in the supply chain classification table that nobody has corrected yet, which I find troubling." "I'll look at Section 9, Benjamin said. "Good," she said, with the satisfaction of someone whose standards are being met. They left through the Column 9 corridor, the escort arranging itself around them with the practiced ease of water finding its level. Saya walking between her mother and the nearest wall with the instinctive positioning of a child who has grown up understanding certain spatial arrangements without being told why. Era looked back once briefly, and the look was not a goodbye so much as a confirmation, the kind exchanged between people who are not, in fact, saying goodbye. Benjamin watched them until the corridor curve took them from view. Then he turned back to Concourse C, located the last unsecured crate, and pushed it into alignment with the others, because it needed doing and he was still there, and those were, as far as he had ever been able to tell, the only conditions that had ever really been required. Behind him, C7 hummed quietly through the empty space, thermal blanket ready, patient and absolute, waiting for a world that still needed what it had to offer.